This is Brian Jackson. Welcome to Lawed Up. I'm your host. I'm an attorney, and the whole purpose of these podcasts is to talk about the law. And today we're talking about the murder of the CEO, Brian Thompson, and the suspect, Luigi. And we're going to talk a little bit about the evidence that's going on right now, and then also the process procedure, what's going on there. We might talk a little bit about healthcare too. And also, I do a podcast that talks about criminal law. If you want to check out my criminal law podcast too, that kind of gives like a 500-foot view of what's taught in law school as far as the criminal statutes. And then at the end, I talk a little bit more in practicality, how the criminal process works. And we'll talk about that in this podcast as well. So let's get into it. So first, we have the murder CEO of United Healthcare, and now a suspect has been arrested, and this has been a hot topic for a lot of people. Healthcare has been an issue for a lot of people, and so a lot of people were kind of rooting for this guy, and there are a lot of interesting things that occurred with this murder. Like for example, on the gun casings, there was defend, deny, depose, and I from what I understand now, is that's a reference to a book of someone in 2012, kind of hitting on the insurance companies, and then apparently he ditched his backpack in Central Park, and it had some Monopoly money, and so a lot of people were thinking that this really smart guy, and this was a very methodical, thought out thing, a lot of puzzle pieces. So a lot of people liked that part of the story too, of all the little pieces going on with it. And then I believe he was in a hostel the night before, and this is kind of where the evidence kicks in to some of the evidence, and they claimed that he was flirting with somebody at the hostel, took his mask off, and they got a good picture of him. From what I understand, too, is that he hopped in a taxi, and I believe there's video footage of him in the taxi as well. And it seems like at that point, he kind of fell off the back end. They claimed that he had a burner phone, and they had no idea. Well, I guess I don't know what was going on in the back end and really what they knew or didn't know, but there was a tip about 280 miles away in Pennsylvania of a McDonald's employee saying, hey, this looks like the guy. And then and apparently he was at McDonald's for quite a while, like 2 hours-ish, and so they found him, and they claimed that they found a backpack on him, and they claimed that inside it there was a manifesto that kind of talked about issues with the insurance company, and I guess a lot of intrigue that people are freaking out about too is that he like pre-recorded a video on YouTube that like later went live. I think he timed on when it would go live, the time he was arrested. And so a lot of people are saying, hey, like he knew what was going on. And some people are claiming that, they got the wrong guy, and we can talk about that a little bit. I don't agree with that per se, and I think a lot of times just because of the intrigue, and maybe we're just so used to movies and crime type movies and shows that we just like a good story, and people are looking for a good story and trying to come up with a good story. But I don't think that's the case here. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And then they found a gun in his backpack and a silencer. Apparently it was 3D printed. And so they arrested him, and the state of Pennsylvania charged him with a crime of illegal gun possession. And because it had a silencer on it, I think most states say you need license for silencer, and then also it was a 3D printed gun. and they charged him with I think he had a fake ID. They charged him with having a fake ID, and then some other just nitpicky stuff that a lot of officers charge him with, people with. That I don't think the other charges really hold water on just um, not telling them who he was when they asked him his name, or like malicious mischief or stuff. And then the state of New York charged him with second degree murder, and we'll talk a little bit about that and why second degree murder and not first degree murder, and what's going on there. So, looking at everything, yeah, a lot of people think that, hey, this was maybe planted and they didn't get the right guy, and this guy was too smart to be caught like this and still have the murder weapon on him and have this manifesto on him because he was so sly with all the other stuff going on. But yeah, again, I don't think that's the case. And also, I would just note that this isn't the first high profile murder that's happened in New York City. So back in the 80s, Beatles legend John Lennon was shot in New York City as well with an individual that was, I guess he just didn't like John Lennon's lifestyle, and I think he had some mental health issues, and so decided to take out John Lennon, unfortunately. And again, I don't know this guy's background or anything, so but just looking at what I've seen so far and hearing what I've heard, I think there is some mental health elements at play here as well, and that's a lot of the uh, answers we get with everything that went on, and it's probably not as complicated as people think, and uh, yeah, and some of this stuff is when he got out of the police car for his court hearing yesterday. He was a little erratic, yelling out things, and then in the court, he was kind of swiveling in his chair and mumbling things to himself. And this is from what news reporters were reporting on. And then also outburst in court. And so, yeah, it seems like there's a couple things going on. And obviously, just the fact that he murdered someone and the way he went about it uh, raises some mental health elements to this as well. Even though he got a master's degree and everything, doesn't mean that there's not some mental health elements. So yeah, so let's look at the evidence. So can they tie him to this? And my big thing is, and the big evidence is the gun, and whether or not they can tie the gun, the killing of a gun, to him. And so when I first heard reports, they said that it was specific handgun that is that can have a silencer on it, and it's quite quiet gun, and uh, and so they went around, and I think some of the early reports was they knew of a handgun that was sold in New York around that time. They went asking people for that. Uh, so my big question was, well, if this is a 3D printed gun and they said it was this kind of gun, then can they really tie him to it? Um, but that could have, but I think all they knew about the gun was just what they saw from the video. I think they didn't actually see the gun. And so there could have been an issue of misidentifying the type of gun too. And it also could have been, from my understanding, it was 3D printed version of the actual gun they thought. But also, if you look at the evidence, when he shot, it seemed like um, he had to cock the gun or yeah, readjust the gun when he was, every time he fired. It seemed like there was a couple misfires too, and so it sounds like that's more of a 3D printed gun than an actual gun, and so it seems like it can tie the gun to him. The other thing too is ballistics, forensics. So a lot of people may not know that every gun has its signature on it, because but also I'm not sure how it works with 3D printed guns. So I guess I don't know the ballistics behind 3D printed guns. I've never had to deal with that before, but most metal guns with a metal barrel um, and all guns have the twist in it to make the bullet spin. And not all twists are created equal, and there's some different variations in it, in the grains, and how the barrel interacts with the bullet, which creates a fingerprint for that gun. So you can look at the rounds, and you can look at the barrel of the gun. So what you do is you shoot. So you take it to a forensics. The forensics shoots more from that gun, and then they analyze the casings of the murder scene, and they look at the casings that they did in lab, and they see if it's a match. So it's a big question on plastic, and if plastic 3D printed guns can make the same marks as a metal gun. And obviously plastic is more brittle than metal, and so it may not be able to etch as much as a normal gun. So that'd be interesting to know, and that could raise an evidence problem down the road if it's hard to do forensics on a gun. And so then at that point, if they can't pinpoint it with forensics, then with the Monopoly bag in Central Park, they could see. I assume they're looking for that for DNA and seeing if there's a DNA match there too. And so that would tie him closer to the crime, because they know that he hopped on an e-bike and went into Central Park. So there's still some evidence that could tie him to that, and raise questions on, well, why was he in New York? But still, that's and the fact that they knew that he hopped on an e-bike. So that would be the Monopoly bag or the backpack could be important evidence too, and then also the with the gun, it's that's one thing that they're trying to. There's this thing called extradition, where you can extradite someone from one state to another. So these are all state crimes. So in order for him to be tried for murder, he has to go to New York, but he was picked up in Pennsylvania. So the state of New York has to get an extradition order for him to go to New York to be tried for his crimes in New York. And so that's a big thing and it sounds like, listening to what his attorney has said, that they're going to try and push back on to try and keep him from getting extradited from New York, and seeing there's a lack of evidence tying him to the crime in New York. So that's kind of what's going on with the evidence and everything. And another interesting part too is, I talked about how they said that he had a burner phone, but then from what I'm reading, they said that in his backpack he had this. I guess it's some kind of case that you can put your cell phone in, where it makes it so your cell phone can't transpond. It's like putting it in, like wrapping it in aluminum foil or something, where the signal just can't get out. And so they say that's why it was hard for them to find him, because he had it. Because with the initial reading, it sounded like he just didn't have a cell phone. And in today's day and age, that's how it's easier to link people to crimes, because if you always have your cell phone on you, then you can just look at the location history and see where you were. And so if he really did have his cell phone the entire time, and it was just muffled, and they might be able to pull that cell phone too. And if it shows that he's in New York and he was specifically at a site, or even if his cell phone wasn't uh, at the murder scene, but it was in Central Park, and he had one backpack there and switched backpacks, that could again um, be sufficient to show everywhere where he went, for example, the hostel and everything, and track him. And also, it's an unknown whether or not he used cash or anything, um, or if he used credit cards, because that's another easy way to track someone, is just their payment history, and be able to pull their credit card history and say, hey, well, you were here, you used your credit card here. So, I mean, he had a bag of cash when they found him, so it's an unknown if he used cash or card. But again, all this evidence just links him to New York, so it would be up to a jury to decide on whether or not there's evidence to link him to New York, or an argument that they can grab onto to say, okay, well, yeah, you showed that he was in New York, but you can't show that he actually killed the guy. But the manifesto, I mean, they're obviously going to use the manifesto and stuff on social media and other stuff to show that he he actually did these things, um, and showing the motive and everything. So what's going to happen now with the process, and what happened yesterday was a bail hearing. And so what that is to determine whether or not they can be released from, I mean, the presumption is everyone is to be released from jail, and that they can walk freely while the charges are pending. That is the presumption. But then there are factors that the courts look at to see whether or not they need to be detained. So one factor is whether or not they're a risk flight. So that could depend on if they're even part of that community, or if they have prior warrants or charges pending that they jumped on. They could look at that. And or just other motives of them wanting to flee. And then all other factors they look at is danger to the community, and how dangerous they could be to someone. And so that's a big one. Obviously, in this case, the danger to the community that the judge looked at in determining bail. And also the purpose of bail is kind of like a security interest, saying, okay, well, if I am a risk flight, then I mean, this is like if they order like $10,000 bail, then you put up the $10,000, and and that is kind of like a promise to the court, saying that I promise, based off this $10,000, that I will show up in court. So if they don't show up in court, that bail can be forfeited, and the court can just seize that $10,000 if they don't show up. And so that's where the bail community comes in, bail bond companies. And so how that usually works is the bail bond companies act as your bank, essentially saying they promise to put this much money up. And there's some states where the bail bond companies don't even have to put up money. They just have to say, we promise that we'll put up this money if he leaves. And then what happens is you reach a deal between the bail bond company and and there's an agreement where and they look at your assets and stuff, and they probably put liens on your assets, like a car or house or something. And then you only have to put up 10%. So if the bail is $100,000, then you put up $10,000, and you just pay that to the bail bond company. So you don't see that money ever again. It's just payment to the bail bond company. So a lot of ways, it's really good business for the bail bond company if no one's jumping court, because they don't have to put up the money. But if somebody does jump court and they have to put up $100,000, then yeah, it's the bail bond company that has to do it. And then the bail bond company has to go after the person and seize their assets to try and recoup that $100,000. But that's essentially how bail works. So that's what the hearing was. And then also one important part of criminal procedure is pleading guilty and not guilty. And I'd like to talk about that too, because a lot of people, and this always happens at the beginning of a criminal process. And so you have to plead guilty or not guilty when they give you the charges in your first day in court. And you're also arraigned in court where they read you your rights, your right to an attorney, your right to a jury trial, your right to remain silent, and being innocent until proven guilty. And that's an important part, being innocent until proven guilty. And so it's the state's burden to put on the case showing that there's evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has occurred. And so just procedurally, I mean, every attorney, when they hop on a case, they always enter a not guilty plea. And a lot of lay people take offense to that on like, well, there's tons of evidence showing he's guilty. How come he's pleading not guilty? And that's, and I guess technically, if he knows that he did it, people could say, well, he's lying and saying he's not guilty. But yeah, it is kind of a weird scenario, but that is, again, it's the state's burden of proofs. So procedurally, it's up to the state to prove it. So I guess from that standpoint, and they don't have the evidence that the state is going to put on yet. The state hasn't given them the evidence. So from a procedural standpoint, you can say that I can plead not guilty, but that's how it works. And so when people freak out saying, "Oh, well, he pleaded not guilty," I mean, that's just the way it is. It's just common practice to plead not guilty, and that's how the procedures start. If you plead guilty, then at that point the judge has to sentence you, and I mean, there's some strategic reasons on why an attorney would advise someone to plead guilty, and that could be if they think that they undercharged them, and and they didn't take a good look at the case, and there's a lot more evidence showing that they committed a more serious crime, and that they could later amend and put that into. They could have them plead guilty right then, so there's not, so they can't make that charge if it's a double jeopardy claim, and just have them take that lesser offense now. So that could be a reason why an attorney would say, "Hey, just plead guilty now. They charge you with a misdemeanor. You could be facing a second-degree felony. I think they undercharged you, so just plead it and let that be the end of it." So that's one reason out of the ordinary where someone could plead guilty right out of the bat. But usually you don't want to. You want to look at the evidence. You want to review the evidence, and you start negotiating with the state to see if you can reach some kind of deal. And that's how this procedure starts. And so once they plead not guilty, once the judge determines bail, then discovery starts. So then the state has to give up all their evidence, and defense attorney can ask for evidence. Defense attorney can start doing their own investigation. So that's really starting the lawsuit in a criminal case is pleading not guilty. So yeah, and then after that, we get to the charges here. So let's specifically talk about second-degree murder. So why didn't state of New York charge them with first-degree murder? And so second-degree murder under New York, looking at the statute, is that you have you killed somebody and it was based off some kind of emotion. You were running on emotion. And first-degree murder in most states typically is like you had cold blood, like you were just calm and cool and killed this guy. So I mean, I think in this scenario, there's probably a lot, huge wiggle room for the state of New York to charge him with first degree murder. And usually emotional claims have to be like at that moment. Like the big one is walking in on your spouse and um, while having intercourse and you shoot either her and or the lover. And so usually it has to be heat of the moment happening right then and there to claim that emotional response. And so this one with the health insurance industry, I mean, it seems like he's got beef with the health insurance um, agency, but it seems like it's not something that happened that day or even that week. It seems like he does have like a picture of his back on Twitter or something with like a plate in it, X-ray, and so maybe he has beef with the health insurance industry. But I think the state of New York has a huge buffer to show that this wasn't like this was so calculated and planned that it was first degree, and it was premeditated. It was in cold blood. He had time, tons of time to think about it instead of go off emotion. So I think the state of New York, the reason why they went for second degree murder is they just didn't want to take the risk of overcharging, because I told you about, attorneys telling them to plead guilty um, if they've made a smaller charge and they should have got charged on a bigger crime. This is kind of the opposite, where if the state of New York overcharges, it's going to be, they're going to have to prove that that it was in cold blood, and so there's this small chance. I mean, um, I think it would be an uphill battle for the defense to make a claim on first degree murder, but there is this small chance that they couldn't get a conviction, and that could look really bad for the state of New York if they don't get a conviction, because the defense did a good job of proving that this wasn't cold, that this was emotional, and so they couldn't get a conviction on first degree murder. So they took the safer route and went to second degree murder, and yeah, they can definitely nail him on second degree murder. So that's where we are in the process right now. Just quick 360 on health insurance too. I mean, this has caused uh, a lot of people to raise the issues on health insurance, and I think it's important to. I think it is a problem in the United States, and I would just note this is on a personal note that the big problem that I see in the health insurance industry is that they are making money off you, off someone who is um, hurt and injured and needs medical help, and their life can in situations where their life is on the line, and it's up to them to decide um, whether or not you're covered or not. And one issue I have is I think there's a lot of scenarios where people are denied claims and or they're forced to take different alternative means of um, therapy or medication before they get what their doctor actually prescribed. And one issue is I can see a lot of their denials and or saying you have to do this first being the practice of medicine. So I have concerns about insurance companies actually playing doctor instead of doctors playing doctor. And then also telling you what doctors you can and can't go to. And that should be a personal choice on doctors. And obviously that's a monetary thing, and or they know that this doctor isn't going to charge for expensive procedures, which may be important in your scenario, and it may not be the best doctor for you in getting diagnosed and getting properly treated. But this is the big problem. This is the biggest one, is that they are profiting off this. They are profiting off people that need health coverage, or just ensuring that they have health coverage, because and so they pay attention, and they are trying to bring money in for the tax pay for not tax the stockholders. That is a big problem, and I don't think health insurance companies should be run by the government. And again, I try not to get political in these podcasts, and that's, again, just a personal opinion, and other people may see that differently, and that's fine. But I think the fine medium is a nonprofit, and where you're not working for stockholders, and if there's any money that is in surplus, that should be able to bring the rates down for their clients, and they should be working for their clients, and that's really how it should be. So yeah, it is crazy to see it's big health insurance companies that show, huge billion-dollar profit margins, and yeah, that they shouldn't be working for stockholders. They should be working for the clients that they're servicing. And so I see that as a huge conflict of interest. And so if you are too aware of what a nonprofit is, it is what it sounds like. You just can't profit. There aren't any stockholders on it. And so it's just the salaries that they pay their employees that is the overhead. So you're just paying the overhead for salary of employees. So, I mean, people freak out about CEOs and all the money they make. But, I mean, I would feel more comfortable, even if a nonprofit CEO was making tons of money, $10 million a year, I would feel way more comfortable with that than a company that's making $8 billion, $10 billion a year in profit, and that's going to the stockholders. So, and with the surplus of a nonprofit, so instead of it going into stockholders' pockets, that should just get reinvested into the company and get reinvested to you, and should help bring your rates down. And if the profit is just going to the company, then it's just not benefiting you and not bringing your rates down. And what stinks with the insurance is, I mean, they know statistically how much it's going to cost for them to profit. And so when they adjust the rates, they know that is going to give them the $10 billion profit, and they know exactly how much to charge you, and if it costs more to get that $10, so they're taking that profit into account when they're adjusting your rates, and I don't think that's fair at all. And so yeah, that shouldn't be calculated into it. So yeah, it's unfortunate. And also, I think that people need to understand too the line between, okay, the insurance companies are unfair, and that needs to be addressed in the public forum. And I think it is an issue that should be brought up, and that should be heavily debated, and that we shouldn't just stand by and let these insurance companies do their thing. And it seems like some other health insurance companies have changed policies just because of what's happened. And I mean, it's unfortunate that it came to that, but also I think that people shouldn't mix justifying a cold-blooded murder and taking the life of someone for this. And I understand that United Healthcare, it sounds like they used AI or something to deny tons of claims, and so with Mr. Thompson being the head of that, and him and I guess the buck ends at him with the decisions made. And so you could say that, hey, yeah, all these people died because of what he did, but I mean, you shouldn't conflate somebody and what happened here with the cold-blooded murder with with what this health insurance company is doing to justify murder. Um, and that's a defense that can't be made either. I mean, Luigi will not be able to make that defense in trial, saying that, well, he killed all these people, so I'm justifying it. I mean, his defense attorney could try and infer that and just rely on the jury whether or not to convict or not, but it's not an affirmative defense that can be used as a jury instruction where the jury could say, oh, yes, this is justified because a bunch of people died too with the decisions of United Healthcare. And, and yeah, it is unfortunate, the healthcare industry, and yeah, a lot of people have died because of denial of health claims, or their lives have been made miserable because they don't have the prescriptions or health care they need because of denial of claims. But again, it shouldn't be conflated with the actions here, and we shouldn't. From my standpoint, our community shouldn't be approving of the actions of what Luigi did either, no matter what his motive. There's different ways to get your point across. I mean, he definitely got his point across, but there's also other ways to go about it where violence isn't the answer, and we should never approve of violence, and there's different ways to go about things than that. Anyways, that's it for now on the Luigi matter and criminal procedure. Like and subscribe to get more of my criminal podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.